The royal palace fell silent. 3 assassins stepped through the grand entrance without hurry, their dark cloaks stirring in the cool air beneath a ceiling of living crystal that reflected 1,000 shifting constellations. 1,200 palace guards reacted almost as one. Magnetic rifles rose. Defensive drones unfolded from hidden compartments in the marble walls. Layers of translucent energy barriers shimmered into existence with a low mechanical hum. Every targeting system locked onto the intruders. No one spoke. No one breathed louder than necessary. The silence itself felt heavier than armor. Queen Valara remained seated upon the elevated throne, her teal skin glowing softly beneath the palace lights, her violet eyes never leaving the 3 figures below. Every tactical display surrounding the throne announced the same reassuring message. Threat contained. Probability of royal harm, 0.02%. Then something happened that none of the palace computers predicted. The tallest assassin slowly turned his head toward the far side of the chamber. His eyes settled on a single human standing near an ordinary service column, hands loosely folded in front of him, wearing a plain black suit instead of military armor. No medals, no rank markings, no advanced exoskeleton, no visible weapon beyond the compact sidearm resting untouched beneath his jacket. Jack Carter didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even acknowledge the assassins with a gesture. He simply watched them the way an experienced rancher watched distant storm clouds, already knowing where the lightning would fall before anyone else noticed the wind changing. A heartbeat passed, then another. The lead assassin lowered his weapon. The second followed. The third exchanged a silent glance with the others before slowly placing both hands where everyone could see them. Without a single word, the 3 figures turned around. They walked back toward the massive palace doors. No panic, no surrender, no negotiation. They simply left. 1,200 guards remained frozen, rifles still aimed at empty air. Even the palace defense AI hesitated, searching for a pattern that did not exist inside its prediction models. One captain finally whispered, "Why are they leaving?" No one answered because no one knew. Queen Valara continued staring at the human. Jack hadn't celebrated. He hadn't relaxed. His eyes never followed the departing assassins. Instead, they drifted upward toward one of the decorative balconies overlooking the throne room. A maintenance worker was replacing a light panel. The worker's ladder leaned 3 inches farther than safety regulations allowed. Jack studied it for only a moment before quietly stepping toward the nearest guard commander. "Move Her Majesty 20 feet to the west balcony," he said in a calm voice. "Now." The commander frowned. "The threat is already gone." "No," Jack replied. That wasn't the threat. Before another question could be asked, a tiny metallic click echoed somewhere high above the chamber. Almost everyone looked toward the enormous front doors where the assassins had disappeared. Jack looked in the opposite direction. His expression never changed. It was the same expression he'd worn the moment the assassins first entered the palace, as if he had already seen the next move before anyone else realized the game had truly begun. 3 days earlier, Jack Carter had been exactly where the entire galaxy assumed he belonged. Nowhere important. The little coffee shop sat on the corner of an ordinary street where delivery trucks rumbled past every morning and commuters checked their watches more often than the traffic lights. The windows were clean but old. The wooden tables carried years of tiny scratches left behind by countless cups and quiet conversations. Fresh coffee filled the room with the familiar scent of roasted beans, warm enough to make the outside world feel farther away than it really was. Jack preferred the table nearest the window, not because of the view, because every reflection in the glass quietly revealed who entered without forcing him to look up. He wrapped both hands around a plain ceramic mug, letting the heat settle into his fingers. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream, the same order every morning for nearly 2 years. The young barista knew his name, but nothing else. To her, he was simply the polite man who always tipped well, always returned his cup to the counter, and always thanked everyone before leaving. The older customers nodded when they saw him. The college students borrowed the empty chair beside his table whenever the shop became crowded. No one noticed the way his eyes casually drifted across every doorway before returning to the newspaper lying unopened beside his coffee. No one wondered why he always chose the seat that offered 2 exits and a clear reflection of the street outside. Retirement had become surprisingly quiet. The alarm clock had disappeared from his life. His old black suit had remained in the closet for months. His phone almost never rang anymore. That was exactly how he wanted it. The world had finally become someone else's responsibility. A delivery driver entered carrying 3 heavy boxes. Jack watched him for half a second before returning to his coffee. The man favored his left knee. Probably an old sports injury. A businessman hurried inside while finishing a phone call, his expensive shoes carrying dust from a construction site several blocks away. He had parked where he should not have. He would receive a parking ticket before lunch. A little girl dropped a blue crayon beneath the neighboring table. Before her father noticed, Jack leaned down, picked it up, and placed it gently beside her coloring book. She smiled. He smiled back. Nothing more. The bell above the front door chimed again. This time Jack looked up. A woman entered wearing a charcoal gray coat despite the warm afternoon. She did not hesitate before walking directly toward his table. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes measured every corner of the room without appearing to move. She stopped beside him. "Jack Carter?" she asked. He nodded once. "May I sit?" He gestured toward the empty chair. She ordered nothing. For several seconds, they simply listened to the quiet sounds of steaming milk and distant traffic. Finally, she slid a thin envelope across the table. Jack did not touch it. "I retired," he said calmly. "I know. Then you already know my answer." The woman studied him with an expression that revealed neither disappointment nor surprise. "Normally I would." She glanced toward the window where afternoon sunlight reflected softly across the glass. "But this is different." Jack remained silent. She took a slow breath before speaking the only words that truly mattered. "We need you." Jack looked down at the untouched envelope. He did not reach for it. Not yet. But for the first time in 2 years, the coffee in front of him grew cold while his thoughts moved somewhere far beyond the little shop on the corner. Edit. The transport descended through layers of silver clouds until the capital of the Valorian Dominion spread beneath Jack Carter like a living work of art. Towers of polished crystal reached nearly half a mile into the sky. Floating bridges connected gardens suspended above shimmering lakes. Hundreds of airships glided between the buildings with perfect precision, while streams of automated traffic followed invisible lanes across the skyline. Every surface reflected order. Every movement reflected technology. It was the kind of civilization that believed every problem already had a mathematical solution. Jack remained seated until the cabin doors opened. He carried only one weathered leather travel bag over his shoulder. No ceremonial uniform. No polished metals. No advanced tactical gear. Just a dark suit that had seen better years and comfortable shoes built for walking instead of impressing people. The reception platform was already waiting. 2 rows of royal guards stood perfectly still beneath banners bearing Queen Valira's crest. Their silver armor gleamed beneath the afternoon sun, while compact energy carbines rested against their shoulders with mechanical precision. At the center of the formation stood Captain Redhan, commander of the Royal Guard. Nearly 7 feet tall with bronze skin and sharp golden eyes, he studied Jack for several long seconds before allowing the slightest hint of disappointment to cross his face. "This is the human?" he asked without trying to lower his voice. The government official who had recruited Jack simply nodded. "This is Jack Carter." Captain Redhan looked him up and down again. "I was expecting someone larger." A few nearby guards exchanged amused glances. One quietly smiled. Another looked at Jack's worn travel bag and raised an eyebrow. Jack noticed every expression without reacting to any of them. He merely thanked the pilot for the flight before stepping onto the platform. As they crossed the palace grounds, servants hurried past carrying flowers, documents, and ceremonial decorations for the Queen's upcoming diplomatic gathering. More than one noble stopped walking long enough to glance toward the unfamiliar human. Their eyes lingered on his plain clothes before quickly losing interest. One elderly aristocrat mistook him for palace staff and casually handed him a folded invitation without even making eye contact. "Deliver this to the West Reception Hall," the noble said before continuing down the marble corridor. Jack accepted the envelope with a polite smile. Of course. He handed it to an actual attendant 30 seconds later without saying another word. Several guards laughed quietly behind him. Captain Redhan shook his head. You could have corrected him. Jack looked toward the distant palace windows instead of answering immediately. He was in a hurry. He thought you were a servant. He needed help. The captain gave a short laugh that carried more disbelief than humor. You will discover that this palace is not a coffee shop on Earth. Here, appearances matter. Jack glanced across the enormous courtyard where dozens of royal guards followed perfectly synchronized patrol routes calculated by the palace security network. Every step matched a schedule. Every camera rotated exactly on time. Every drone completed the same predictable flight pattern. He quietly watched for another few seconds before asking a simple question. Do they always turn that corner at exactly the same second? Captain Redhan frowned. Yes. The route is optimized by the Central Defense Intelligence. Jack nodded once. That is what I was afraid of. The captain dismissed the comment with a wave of his hand. You are here because the Queen requested a symbolic human representative. Leave strategy to professionals. More guards smiled as they continued toward the palace entrance. None of them noticed that. Jack had already stopped looking at the soldiers. Instead, he was watching the spaces between them. Jack Carter spent his first morning inside the royal palace doing something that puzzled everyone assigned to watch him. He did not inspect the armory. He did not request access to classified intelligence reports. He did not ask for the palace defense network or the tactical simulations that Captain Redhan proudly described during the welcome briefing. Instead, Jack walked. Slowly, quietly. His polished shoes made almost no sound across the pale stone floors as morning sunlight poured through towering crystal windows. Servants hurried around him carrying breakfast trays, floral arrangements, diplomatic documents, and polished silverware for the upcoming royal reception. Every few steps, he stopped for only a second before moving again. Captain Redhan finally crossed his arms. What exactly are you looking for? Jack looked at a security camera mounted high above the corridor. That camera is 3 degrees lower than the others. The captain glanced upward. Impossible. The system calibrates itself every hour. Jack nodded toward the polished floor beneath it. Then why is the reflection different? A technician scanned the camera with a handheld device. 30 seconds later he frowned. The mounting bracket had shifted by exactly 3 degrees after a maintenance drone failed to tighten one fastening bolt. The technician looked surprised. Captain Redhan said nothing. Jack continued walking. They entered the eastern reception hall where servants prepared long dining tables for visiting ambassadors. Jack paused beside one untouched place setting. A porcelain cup of hot tea rested beside an empty chair. Steam still curled gently above the surface. He reached down and rotated the cup handle 90 degrees. This seat was occupied 5 minutes ago. A palace steward laughed politely. No one has entered this room all morning. Jack pointed toward a thin ring of moisture beneath the cup. The condensation has not reached the edge of the saucer yet. The steward checked the service log. One of the kitchen assistants had delivered the tea exactly 5 minutes earlier, before being called away unexpectedly. Again, Jack simply continued walking. Outside, the palace gardens stretched across nearly 20 acres of carefully sculpted terraces. A light breeze carried the scent of flowering trees through the pathways. Jack stopped beside a marble statue and watched the leaves moving overhead. Every tree leaned gently with the wind except one. That one was transplanted recently, he said. Captain Redhan shook his head. Those trees have stood here for decades. Jack knelt beside the roots. The soil surrounding one trunk was darker than the rest. A gardener quietly admitted the tree had been replaced 2 days earlier after disease damaged the original. No official record had yet been filed. The captain's confidence faded another fraction. They returned inside. Jack slowed near a wide staircase covered by a crimson runner. Hundreds of polished boots crossed those stairs every day, yet one faint gray mark remained near the 3rd step from the top. He crouched briefly before standing again. Someone wearing construction boots came through here after the cleaning crew finished. Captain Redhan immediately objected. Construction workers are prohibited inside the royal residence. Jack pointed toward the tiny grains trapped inside the carpet fibers. That dust contains limestone. The palace uses white crystal flooring, not limestone. An investigation confirmed that a repair contractor had taken the wrong staircase during the previous evening before anyone noticed. By late afternoon, the laughter had disappeared. Guards no longer whispered when Jack walked past. Servants watched him with quiet curiosity. Even Captain Redhan had stopped offering explanations before Jack spoke. Everywhere they went, the palace trusted scanners, schedules, and algorithms. Jack trusted reflections, silence, worn leather, drifting air, forgotten footprints, cooling tea, and habits that machines never thought to question. He never claimed to be smarter than the palace. He simply noticed what everyone else had already stopped seeing. By the second day, Jack Carter stopped trying to understand the palace. He started understanding the people inside it. Buildings followed blueprints. People followed habits. Habits were harder to fake. The morning council gathered inside the circular strategy chamber beneath a dome of transparent crystal. Queen Valyra listened as ministers discussed trade routes, diplomatic schedules, and security forecasts projected by the Palace Intelligence Network. According to every analysis, the upcoming state reception remained perfectly safe. 99.9% confidence. Captain Redhan folded his arms with visible satisfaction. The system has completed another full scan. Jack remained near the rear wall, saying nothing. His eyes drifted across the room instead of toward the holographic display. The chief advisor kept adjusting the sleeve of his formal robe every few minutes. A junior secretary glanced at the entrance every time someone mentioned tomorrow's banquet. One palace attendant carried fresh water to the council table but never once looked toward the queen. Another servant looked at her 3 times too many. None of it proved anything. All of it mattered. After the meeting ended, Captain Redhan approached him. "You have been quiet today." Jack nodded. "I am listening." "To what?" "People usually answer questions nobody asked." The captain frowned. "That makes no sense." "It will." An hour later, Jack walked through the Western Gallery, where portraits of former rulers stretched for nearly 200 feet. A maintenance worker polished the marble floor with careful, even strokes. Jack slowed for only a second. The man wore spotless gloves, but the left cuff of his uniform carried a faint trace of dark blue pollen. There were no flowering plants anywhere in the western wing. Jack continued walking without speaking. Near the Royal Library, he noticed another small detail. A palace clerk signed 3 delivery forms using identical handwriting until the 4th signature became noticeably slower. Not tired, distracted. Someone had interrupted a routine that normally never changed. Jack folded the observation into memory without comment. During lunch, Queen Valyra crossed the dining hall greeting staff members by name. Nearly everyone smiled naturally. One server smiled exactly 1 second too late. Another bowed perfectly but forgot to step backward before turning away. Tiny mistakes, human mistakes, or carefully rehearsed performances. Captain Redhan quietly watched Jack studying the room. "Do you suspect someone?" Jack picked up his coffee. "I suspect certainty." "That is not an answer. It is the only honest one." Late that afternoon, the Palace Intelligence System proudly announced another security update. No unauthorized entries. No hidden devices. No external threats. The digital map glowed green across every corridor. Jack looked at the map before looking at the people standing around it. "The system keeps searching for strangers," he said softly. "What if the danger already belongs here?" Silence settled over the room. Nobody replied immediately. Nobody wanted to. The advisor glanced toward the captain. The captain looked toward the intelligence director. The intelligence director quietly reviewed reports that had already been reviewed twice. Jack noticed all of it. He did not accuse anyone. He did not offer names. He simply understood something that everyone else still resisted. If an enemy had reached the queen, they had not entered through the front gate. They had arrived long ago. They drank the same coffee, walked the same halls, shared the same meetings, smiled at the same people. And somewhere inside the palace, someone had become so comfortable that they no longer believed anyone was still paying attention. Jack Carter asked for one thing that evening. Not classified reports. Not surveillance recordings. Not access to the palace defense intelligence. He asked for the last 6 months of maintenance schedules. Captain Redhan stared at him in disbelief. "Maintenance?" Jack nodded. "Everything important eventually needs repair." The records arrived 20 minutes later. Thousands of pages. Air filtration, elevator calibration, lighting systems, water circulation, sensor inspections, drone charging stations. Most people would have searched for failures. Jack searched for routines. He spread the pages across a long conference table and quietly traced dates with one finger. Every 30 days, the palace security network entered a synchronized diagnostic cycle lasting exactly 90 seconds. Every department knew about it. Every technician planned around it. Every automated defense protocol temporarily shifted into verification mode before returning to full operation. Captain Redhan folded his arms. That has been standard procedure for 23 years. Jack did not answer immediately. Instead, he compared another document, then another. Finally, he looked up. Who approved changing the diagnostic window from midnight to noon? The captain frowned. The change improved efficiency during the Queen's public reception. Who suggested it? Silence. Nobody in the room knew. The recommendation had arrived months earlier as part of a larger administrative package. It had passed through several departments before becoming routine. Jack leaned back in his chair. That is interesting. The intelligence director shook his head. Even if someone exploited those 90 seconds, they would still have to bypass 1,200 guards. Jack slowly pushed the maintenance reports aside. You are still thinking about one target. The director blinked. The Queen. Exactly. Jack stood and walked toward the enormous holographic map floating above the conference table. The palace glowed in brilliant blue. Patrol routes crossed every hallway with mathematical perfection. Defense drones appeared as tiny moving lights. Every entrance remained sealed. Every corridor remained protected. It looked flawless. Jack pointed toward the ceremonial assembly hall where tomorrow's diplomatic gathering would begin. How many representatives will attend? Nearly 400, the advisor replied. Military commanders? Yes. Provincial governors? Yes. Economic ministers? Yes. Judicial council? Yes. The room gradually became quiet. Jack looked at each face before speaking again. If someone wanted only the Queen, there are easier opportunities. Nobody interrupted him now. Tomorrow, nearly every person capable of governing this dominion will stand inside one building at the same time. Captain Redhan slowly lowered his arms. You believe the Queen is not the objective. Jack shook his head. She is only the symbol. He looked once more at the maintenance schedule. An assassination removes one leader. His finger rested on the palace map. A coup removes the entire government. The words settled over the room like cold air. Suddenly, dozens of details that had never connected began forming a different picture. The unusual maintenance changes. The perfectly timed administrative revisions. The strange behavior inside the palace. The confidence of people who never seemed afraid. They had all assumed someone wanted one life. Jack had been watching something much larger. He quietly walked to the window overlooking the illuminated capital. Thousands of lights stretched for miles beyond the palace walls. Peaceful. Ordered. Predictable. The three assassins were never supposed to succeed, he said softly. They were supposed to be seen. Captain Redhan stared at him. A distraction. Jack nodded once. While everyone searched for killers, he looked back toward the council chamber where every senior official would gather the following afternoon. Someone else prepared to inherit an empire. Jack Carter did not request additional guards. He did not order emergency checkpoints. He did not seal the palace gates or increase the number of security drones circling above the capital. Every recommendation presented by the Royal Guard followed the same logic. Add more defenses. Add more scanners. Add more soldiers. Jack quietly declined every one of them. Captain Redhan could no longer hide his frustration. If you truly believe a coup is coming, why are we reducing patrols instead of strengthening them? Jack folded the latest security report and placed it on the table. Because they already know where every patrol will be. The captain stared at him. Then we change the routes. They will learn the new ones. Then what do you suggest? Jack looked toward the enormous palace map glowing across the wall. Hundreds of blue lights represented guards moving with perfect precision through every corridor. Stop protecting the map. Nobody understood. Queen Valira watched him silently, allowing him to continue. Jack stepped closer to the display and switched it off. The room suddenly became darker. For years, your palace has trained everyone to believe security is a schedule. Patrols begin at 8 o'clock. Ceremonies begin at 10 o'clock. Meetings begin at noon. Every important person stands exactly where the calendar says they will stand. He turned toward the Queen. Your enemies are not chasing people. He paused. They are chasing expectations. The room remained silent. Jack finally unfolded a handwritten notebook from his old leather bag. There were no holograms, no algorithms, only names, locations, and simple arrows drawn with a black ink pen. Tomorrow's reception will happen. Captain Redhan nodded cautiously. Of course. Jack shook his head. Only everyone else needs to believe that. For the next hour, he quietly reassigned rooms, not people. The diplomatic meeting would officially remain inside the Grand Assembly Hall, but the actual discussions would occur in an entirely different chamber that had not hosted a government meeting in almost 40 years. The public schedule remained untouched. The digital invitations remained exactly the same. The Palace Network continued announcing preparations for the Grand Hall. Catering staff decorated the familiar ballroom. Cleaning crews polished the marble floors. Security drones concentrated around the location every computer expected to matter. Meanwhile, without fanfare, the real decision-makers would enter through ordinary service corridors normally used by archivists and museum guides. No ceremonies, no music, no cameras, no obvious destination. Captain Redhan frowned as realization slowly reached him. You are creating two palaces. Jack smiled faintly. No. He looked toward the silent queen. I am creating one palace and one story. Even Queen Vaelira seemed intrigued. Explain. Jack folded the notebook closed. Every successful plan depends on one assumption. He tapped the cover once with his finger. If I remove the assumption, the plan survives only on paper. Late that evening, palace staff continued preparing the magnificent Grand Assembly Hall exactly as scheduled. Chandeliers sparkled. Flags were arranged with perfect symmetry. Musicians rehearsed quietly. Beneath the vaulted ceiling, it looked ready to host the most important gathering in the Dominion's history. Jack stood alone in the empty doorway for a few seconds before calmly switching off the lights and walking away. Behind him remained a room every conspirator believed would decide the future of an empire. Ahead of him walked the queen and the people who actually would. The enemy had spent months preparing to strike a target with absolute precision. Jack had simply made sure that, when the moment finally arrived, the target would no longer exist. The following morning arrived with almost unsettling calm. Palace staff carried breakfast trays through polished corridors exactly on schedule. Diplomats arrived beneath fluttering banners exactly as the official program promised. Musicians tuned their instruments inside the magnificent Grand Assembly Hall where every camera, every security drone, and every conspirator expected history to unfold. Jack Carter stood alone beside a narrow observation window overlooking the empty room. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. The hall looked perfect. Too perfect. Behind him, Queen Vaelira entered quietly. Everything is ready, she said. Jack nodded. Yes. She looked around the deserted chamber. No one is coming here. Exactly. Before another word could be spoken, the side door opened. 3 figures stepped inside wearing the same dark travel cloaks that had appeared inside the throne room days earlier. Captain Redhan immediately reached for his sidearm, but Jack raised one hand without looking away from the visitors. Leave it. The captain hesitated. The 3 strangers stopped nearly 30 feet away. No one hurried. No one appeared nervous. For several long seconds, the room remained silent except for the distant sound of music echoing from another part of the palace. Finally, the tallest visitor slowly lowered his hood. His face carried the calm expression of someone who had already made an important decision before entering the room. He looked directly at Jack. You changed the battlefield. Jack answered with the faintest smile. You noticed. The man gave a single nod. We always notice. Captain. Redhan took one careful step forward. You admit you came here. The stranger never looked at him. We came to leave. Confusion spread across every face except Jack's. Queen Vaelira studied the visitors carefully. If your objective was this government, why abandon the mission? The stranger finally turned toward her with genuine respect. Because the mission no longer exists. Jack remained completely still. He had expected this answer before sunrise. The stranger returned his attention to the human. When we learned you accepted this assignment, we believed the reports were wrong. He paused briefly before continuing. Retired men do not return without a reason. Captain Redhan frowned. Who is he? None of the 3 answered immediately. Instead, the second visitor quietly removed a small metallic coin from his pocket and placed it on the polished floor between them. An old Earth Challenge coin. Its edges were worn smooth from years of use. Jack recognized it instantly, but made no effort to pick it up. You remember Prague? The second visitor said softly. Jack nodded once. I do. Singapore. Yes. The embassy in Buenos Aires? I remember all of them. Queen Valara looked from the coin to Jack, realizing she was listening to fragments of a history no official record had ever mentioned. The tallest visitor folded his hands calmly behind his back. Across 3 decades, every organization that hired professionals like us collected the same lesson. He glanced toward Captain Redhan. Weapons were never the problem. Then he looked directly into Jack's eyes. Patterns were. The room became perfectly still. Every operation failed the moment Jack Carter entered it, because he never defended what everyone expected him to defend. He protected decisions, not buildings. People, not schedules. Intentions, not appearances. He slowly shook his head. You cannot plan against someone who changes the question before you finish calculating the answer. Queen Valara spoke quietly. You are telling me 3 assassins abandoned an empire because of 1 retired human? The stranger answered without hesitation. We do not fear the queen. His eyes never left Jack. We fear you. No one inside the room laughed. No one questioned the statement. Because for the first time since Jack Carter had arrived on the capital world, everyone finally understood why the 3 assassins had lowered their weapons before a single order had ever been given. The official ceremony began exactly at noon. Delegations from 17 star systems filled the grand hall that had never been intended to host the true meeting. Reporters praised the flawless security operation. Palace officials congratulated one another for preventing what the public would only remember as an unexplained diplomatic disturbance. Queen Valara stood before the assembled guests, thanked every member of the royal guard, and announced that stability had been preserved without panic or unnecessary sacrifice. When the applause faded, an attendant quietly approached the throne. Your Majesty, he whispered, we cannot find Mr. Carter. She smiled faintly. You are looking in the wrong place. Nearly half a mile away, beyond the palace walls, a small civilian shuttle rested on an ordinary landing pad overlooking the river that wound through the capital. Jack Carter carried the same weathered leather bag over his shoulder that he had brought when he arrived. Nothing about him suggested he had just altered the course of an empire. He wore the same dark suit, the same comfortable shoes, the same calm expression. No photographers waited. No honor guards stood at attention. No musicians played farewell music. That was exactly how Jack preferred it. As the shuttle completed its pre-flight checks, footsteps echoed across the landing platform. Captain Redhan approached alone. Gone was the skepticism that had marked their first meeting. He stopped a few feet away and extended a small velvet case. Inside rested the highest civilian decoration the Dominion could award to a foreign citizen. Jack looked at it for a moment before gently closing the lid. It belongs to someone else, he said. It belongs to the people who chose the harder decision. Captain Redhan frowned. You saved the government. Jack shook his head. No. He glanced toward the distant skyline where the crystal towers reflected the afternoon sun. People saved themselves once they stopped believing the wrong story. The captain lowered the metal. You could stay. The queen would make room for you here. Jack smiled politely. I retired once already. You would leave after everything that happened? Jack rested his travel bag inside the shuttle doorway. The goal of a bodyguard is not to become necessary. The engines hummed softly as warm air drifted across the platform. Queen Valara appeared at the far end of the landing field accompanied only by 2 attendants. She had chosen not to interrupt his departure with ceremony. Instead, she simply inclined her head in quiet gratitude. Jack returned the gesture. No speeches were needed. Some conversations ended better without words. The shuttle doors began closing. Captain Redhan continued watching the human through the narrowing opening until one final question escaped almost unconsciously. Your Majesty, he asked quietly after the shuttle lifted from the platform, are humans really that dangerous? Queen Valara followed the small vessel as it climbed into the brilliant afternoon sky until it became only a distant point of light. Then she answered with complete certainty. No. She remained silent for another moment before adding, they simply know when violence is the last option. The shuttle disappeared beyond the clouds while life inside the capital slowly returned to normal. New patrol routes were no longer perfectly predictable. Meetings no longer followed identical schedules. Guards learned to observe before assuming. Cameras continued watching hallways, but people began watching one another with greater honesty. Years later, new recruits to the Royal Guard would still hear stories about the quiet human who carried an old leather bag, drank black coffee, noticed what everyone else ignored, and left without asking for recognition. Most would assume the stories had grown larger with time. Queen Valeira never corrected them, because she understood something that no machine had ever calculated. Technology protected kingdoms. Experience protected people. And sometimes the strongest person in the room was the one who never needed anyone else to notice.